Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Henrik Bick. I'm here with the communications team with the Music Business Association. Happy to welcome you to the final webinar in our Spring 2024 Common Ground webinar series. Before we get started with the session, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping notes for y'all. Reminder that since we're on Zoom, best way to connect with your fellow attendees today is to do so through the chat, in case you like to network with everyone who's online. And we will be hosting Q&A at the end of the session. Feel free to drop them in the chat via the dedicated Q&A box that will allow our presenters to see them, and we will be sure to answer them at the end of today's webinar. Before we get started, just a couple of music biz related notes. It's hard to believe, but we are just under a month away from the start of Music Biz 2024, taking place May 13th through the 16th at the JW Marriott Nashville. For all the information on the program that we've announced so far, an up-to-date agenda, a list of the companies who have registered to attend, as well as, and I'm seeing that the chat is disabled, folks. I will get that ready for you as we speak. Sorry about that. But for all information on the conference, for registration, if you haven't registered already, and for a look at our interactive agenda, visit musicbiz2024.com. Or visit musicbiz.org. That'll take you there as well. And chat should be working now, so feel free to give that a test. Beyond that, be sure to visit our website while you're there. You'll find out about our next virtual event. It actually comes up in a couple of days. On Tuesday, April 23rd, we'll be hosting the next session in our Music Biz Passport series. It'll be co-hosted by folks at NPR and Remus Publishing. And it will explore the Latin music industry and how Latin is kind of permeating into all types of genres and areas of the business it never has before. So do be sure to check that out. That's available to register for free via musicbiz.org. And as we get closer to the conference, be sure to visit our website and socials. That is Music Biz Assoc at Music Biz Assoc on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. That's where you can find the latest announcements for the conference, other virtual events, and everything else you need to know about Music Biz. But let's get started with today's session. We're really grateful to have the team at Verifi Media presenting, and we will introduce Chloe Johnson from the Verifi team to get things started. Chloe, take it away.
Hey, thanks. Nice to see you all. As you can see, there are some other secret guests waiting in the wings. So we are going to have a bit of a formal presentation for about a half hour. And then we'll be opening up to a panel with some of our VRDA members. So please do stick around and please do put some questions in that Q&A section because we will hope to get to as many as possible at the end. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. So the network effect on music metadata is, I think, a hot topic for the VRDA. And one of the questions that we've been asking ourselves for the last year has been, can data be improved by the inclusion of more participants in an ecosystem and more different versions or perspectives of data in an ecosystem? And hopefully after today, that will be demystified and we will have answered that question for ourselves. Quick plug, just to follow up on Henrik's plug for Music Biz in Nashville. Verifi is one of the co-sponsors of the Metadata Summit, which is taking place on the Wednesday. There's a lot of really great panels and speakers that are going to be coming and speaking on the metadata track. Not always the most well-attended or fun track, but I really believe it's great. And we've got some great programming this year. So please do consider giving that a look and stopping by if you're going to Nashville. Verifi's CEO, Ken Umezaki, will also be moderating a panel, so he'll be around on the Wednesday. And if you have any further questions and you want to chat in person, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will hope to see you in Nashville as well. Another little piece of housekeeping, because I know a lot of the attendees, both either live today or maybe that have registered and are going to watch this after as a recording, come from the sort of education student side of things or independent artists, which is so amazing to see. I'm excited that so many people are interested in metadata. A lot of the topics that I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be kind of grazing past that really do deserve a lot more of an in-depth explanation that we just simply don't have time for today. But if you have any further questions about, for example, how copyright works, where you're supposed to register your songs, how you're supposed to do them, et cetera, what data goes into processing royalties and all of those great things, you can head to our website where there's a resources page, and you can watch some of these videos to kind of give you a better understanding of some of these things I'm going to be talking about today. Of course, feel free to pop questions in the chat as well, but if we or in the Q&A box. But if we don't end up getting to your question, you have further clarifications, then also please feel free to reach out and email me. I'm Chloe@verifi.media. So diving in, so what we're going to talk about today is collaborative data, the network effect of working together on improving data sets. Why should we do it? What is it? What does it mean? And also how we are approaching it as Verifi Media and as the Verifi Rights Data Alliance. We'll have a couple examples, some of which I have creatively anonymized, so we'll get to those. To kind of show you the power of what we've seen so far and what we've been working on as a VRDA collaborative environment. I'll touch a little bit on the future of where we might be going, things and trends to be looking out for, and then I'll be inviting our esteemed guests to join us at the end for a panel. So why collaborate, or why did we start the VRDA in the first place is another way to maybe think about this. So we joined together, the folks that you see on your screen here were our inaugural members in 2022. And we came together because we really believed that together we are stronger and together we know more. And that the problems that we're each kind of trying to solve in our own silos could be expedited, could be made more simplistic or easier or efficient for our teams if we were to work together, because we often will be sharing or touching shoulders on some of that data. Another way to sort of think about this is the sort of metaphor of if you are only touching one part of an elephant, you might think that you're touching the tusk, you might think, oh, it's quite smooth, I must be touching a stone. Or if you're touching the back end of the elephant, you might be thinking, oh, I'm touching something quite rough. But it's only when you come together and you explain to one another what it is that you're experiencing or what you're seeing, that you get the full picture and you get the full elephant. Very kind of similar approach, I think, to how we think about the VRDA, which is each company is in their own sector of the business. They are somewhat separate from one another or siloed or in their own kind of lane. And the data that they are working on, or you might be working on day in, day out, which is very specific to you, could actually be benefiting somebody across the street from you, but you guys kind of don't have an opportunity or a way to communicate that data. So the VRDA, like I said, came together in 2022 to see if we could make a scalable solution for the industry and how we could collaborate, and importantly, undertake some research projects, which is what we'll be presenting today is the output of some of that research. Another way of thinking about it is thinking of each touch point in the supply chain, from the creator all the way to a maybe streaming platform where the fans are engaging with the music. There are a lot of stakeholders, touch points, whether that be a publisher, a label, society, a distributor, different societies or different publishers representing your catalog in different territories, other co-writers and people who are working on this. A lot of different people are coming together and entering, re-entering very similar, if not the same data in many places. And if something goes missing, or if something is wrong, or something starts disagreeing, then that can flag a discrepancy to the people who are trying to process your royalties, and suddenly you have delayed payments, missing payments, etc. So that's what we're trying to avoid, of course, and we want to do it in an efficient way if possible. There is a much more detailed version of what I'm about to show you in a video that's on our resources page that I mentioned. So I won't go into a huge amount of detail here, but for those who may be watching this and are a little bit unfamiliar with music metadata and how the work and recording are interacting with one another, there are two sides to every recorded asset. You have the recording itself, represented as a unique song recording by an ISRC code. And that is monetized or put out into the world to the public to listen to through the mechanism of a product or an album. And so that product is represented by a barcode, which is a UPC or an EAN code. And that represents either how you're listening to something digitally, or maybe you've purchased a physical copy of something. That recorded side of the industry is represented or makes its way to you via distributors, labels, and is collected upon by those distributors and by neighboring rights societies where a public performance is involved. There's also a composition. So who wrote that song that you just recorded? Who is the lyricist, etc. And that side of the coin is represented by publishers and by collection societies for the songwriters themselves. I won't go into the detail of all of the rest of this slide, but it's meant to show you that there's lots of different types of copyright that are being exploited basically with every public performance, every download, every stream. And they're coming from different angles, different sectors. Different people might be responsible for collecting that money for you and ultimately sending it back. So there's a lot of places, to be familiar with knowing how to register and have an account with. But also it kind of just goes to show that there are lots of different places, again, in that pipeline or around the elephant, where you're kind of, if you're only focusing on neighboring rights, you might kind of forget that your sister CMO that's working on the performance rights for the songwriter, hey, let's work together, that type of thing. So that's kind of just a high level overview of the recorded to work side and how when and because they become kind of inherently separate as we go through the supply chain, bringing them back together, although it seems like an easy task, is not maybe always that easy. And we'll see some examples in a moment. Very kind of scary slide here, again, which I go into animated detail on a video. But just to kind of show you a snapshot of like, even in one song with 3 writers, you can have beginning to have multiple rows of data based on different territories with different publishers, administrators, sub-publishers, etc. Different shares being allocated to different folks to collect for you. So again, it just becomes a very, what seems like a simple, me and Joe wrote a song together, can become very, very complex when it comes to who is actually then representing that song around the world for you. So what is our approach? How do we work together to try to bring this data back in sync? First and foremost, we think it's really important that your data remains your data, exactly how you sent it to us for analysis, and that effectively your data is compared to not only all the other folks in the party, but also to the final version, which we call the Verifi composite, which is our best known truth Frankenstein version of everything together based on scores, authenticity, authority, and the like. And so what we do is we help you find where there's gaps, maybe missing data, these white boxes, where you maybe have differences, data that's different enough that is worth changing. So for example, the writer name between the label and DSP seem to disagree with the writer name at the publisher and society in this visual example. And we're also looking at trying to find validation and invalidation of certain work to recording matches or participant to work or recording matches. So it's an enrichment exercise, it's a validation exercise, and it's also kind of an improvement or augmentation exercise, if you will, in terms of updating information so it's the most correct as possible. The way we do this, and I won't go into a ton of detail here because there are also more detailed explanations on our website of our actual solution, but very broadly, we ingest your data, no matter how you have it, whether you're a CWR user or a DDEX user or a CSV user. We ingest your data, we break it apart into its various entities, so it's works, recordings, products, participants at the most high level. And then also the links that describe how those participants are linked to a work, how those writers are linked to a work, how those publishers are linked to a work through a writer and through a territory, and so forth. We then apply whatever you're looking to do to it. So you want to enhance it. So you want to take your existing data, find gaps, pull in authoritative data from your peers, and enrich your data. We can start from a recording or a work and seek to find its counterpart. So find its work for a recording or find recordings for a work. If you already have a pair, and we'll talk a lot about this later in the validation exercise, if you already have a pair and you want to ensure that that work to recording pair is correct, we also do a process where we can evaluate that and score that and tell you what we think. And we're also looking at how you can take, for example, participants and ownership information in that picture, and make sure that you have the right owners, the right writers, the right artists linked up, and that everybody kind of agrees. And we'll see some examples of that as well. I have some of our wonderful developers on the call, so just shout out to you guys for joining and listening in. So apologies to them specifically if I say anything that's not as perfect as I'm sure they would say it. But the way that we do this is through an acyclical graph technology, where it allows us, because we have the separate processes in their own distinct nodes and in a sort of matching pathway that we can dictate. It gives us flexibility. It allows us to do matching quickly at scale for large data sets, which is very key because we're talking about data sets that are millions and millions of assets large. And it also lets us have granularity and transparency into each part of that algorithmic matching exercise, if you will. So you can kind of jump in there and you can make a tweak, for example, in how you want to handle title matching or how you want to cleanse a writer name, et cetera, because no two client data sets are going to look the same, and you might need to apply slightly different logic. So that adaptability, I think, is really key, and that ability to also kind of go in and see, why did it score it that way? What data was it analyzing when it did it? Also really kind of takes the scary black box, this matching algorithm did something and I don't know what it was, away, and allows you to know exactly what it did and exactly how you arrived at your answer. So the pilot that we ran, which I think some of you may have joined today because you were very excited to hear this, so this is your time to tune in. The pilot we ran last year was looking at two kind of research questions. One was, can I find better writer data available at the publisher and CMO level to enrich, correct, augment the data that's on a DSP that has been delivered by a label through a distributor? And can we provide suggestions and corrections back to the label distributor DSP by making these authoritative matches? And is that worth doing, I suppose? Secondly, was to look at existing pair matches. So existing ISRC to work potential pairs, pools, that are being sent back in reports, maybe to publishers and CMOs that are maybe available on third-party platforms, and really trying to help clients interpret that information and take in what is good and reject what is bad so that you can make an efficient process. So we had a head start a little bit on the first piece, the writer corrections, because we actually have been doing this for Fuga for maybe almost 3 years now, actually, with some of their labels, where we take in feeds of ERN messages, we look for corresponding works that match the songwriter and titles. And if we find a matching work, then we're able to suggest back to those labels, hey, this looks really great, but you're missing a writer, or hey, this looks great, but the writer name looks funky. And also enrich that information with an ISWC if there is one, IPI numbers if there are some, and really helping kind of push publishing data back into the hands of a label after the release has happened, after the work has been finalized, and allow them to redeliver some credits. Not every label will want to do that, of course, but those that have been using us have had a lot of success there. So some examples, there's a lot on this slide, so I'll direct your eye over to the left-hand side first. So on this chart, what you're looking at is over 2 years on an average for our label clients that have been doing this, how many ISWCs have been matched to their ISRCs. It doesn't mean necessarily works to the recordings. There might be more works than there are ISWCs, but how many specifically WCs have been matched to RCs? The top purple line does continue to kind of creep up, and I think that is in part due to the fact that these labels that are working with us are encouraging their songwriters to make sure they're registered with a CMO, to make sure that they're registering their works with their CMO, maybe seeking publishing, maybe over time some of these artists become published or become members of a society. And so eventually kind of those older catalog recordings also end up with an ISWC. But you can see it never really reaches 100%. There's still kind of 20% to play with, where the work simply never makes it to a CMO or never makes it all the way to getting an official ISWC, because there are a number of things that we won't go into, but a number of reasons why that could happen. Then we have in the teal line the number of ISWCs or registrations that were available at time of release. So we've been tracking of a label's releases in the month or in the quarter of blank. how many of these recordings already had a match in our system or already had a match available. And so that kind of can fluctuate. But on average, it kind of ends up around sort of like the 20%, I'd say, experientially, will have a work available, and 80% will not. So, asking a label to go out there with absolutely perfect writer data at time of release is kind of a tall order, because there isn't really a database where they can go and ask for that information. There isn't really a way that they can access even, or to ask the publisher maybe, because possibly the publisher doesn't even know that that work is about to go see the light of day. So it's important, I think, to have a mechanism that can be keeping things in sync over time, is kind of what we found from this exercise. We also found that there is, because of, I think, this problem of the lack of good works data in a particular database available at time of release, that there are a lot of mistakes or corrections that could happen or could be made. When I talk about, on the kind of top right here, new recordings versus catalog, what I mean here is, when digital kind of first started flourishing, there wasn't really a requirement or a lot of good standards around what data needed to be released to a DSP. And so there weren't always writers, right? And then it started becoming over time a requirement to have writers on many DSPs at the time of release. So new recordings kind of describe that era of you need a writer. And the catalog is like, you didn't always have to have one. So of the stuff that ended up with a writer in the catalog, 15 to 70% of it was still slightly incorrect, missing a writer, had an extra writer, or just looked funky, kind of different writer spellings, etc. 8 to 10% of the stuff in the new era where you do need to have a writer is still kind of mismatching, I would say, from stuff that's being registered eventually at the CMO or the publisher level. But kind of importantly, and again, this is only of our label client data, so not necessarily the entire music ecosystem. It could honestly be worse in the music ecosystem. But 40 to 50% of catalog recordings seem to have no writer data available at all at the recording level, either within a label's database or within the DSP's database. So that kind of exercise around what do we do with catalog, I think honestly still remains an open question for the industry, because it's going to be very difficult to sort through what's going on in that history. But at least we know, and it's encouraging to see, that of the newer stuff, the stuff that at least has some contextual writer data, there are corrections that can be made, and they can be done kind of at an automated algorithmic suggestion type of way. The second thing we did was pair validation. And this was, again, taking multiple potential work to recording pairs and scoring them and finding some context. We worked with not only VRDA members, but also with some members outside of the VRDA who all shall remain nameless and anonymous here, but who were very, very helpful in coming in with their data and overlapping to see, what's the power of this network effect of data. And I'm pleased to say that even in this closed ecosystem where we really only had a handful of participants, considering how much music is out there in the world, we found a 70% overlap between the client data sets, 50% of which did have enough contextual information, like writer names, available for scoring. And then around 30% of that, on average, across the clients, of course, some will have more and some will have less, had scoring high enough, perfect enough, that you could automatically accept that into your system. And there was also a fairly large chunk of stuff that had automatically, reject this in your system. Already allowing for you to kind of process huge amounts of data, millions and millions of tracks, in a kind of succinct and quick way, and say, okay, this is allowing me to make a claim or delete something from my system or reject something that's been coming in as a suggestion. So that was super encouraging to see. And I think it's one of the key goals for the VRDA to explore further with other partners on how do we kind of continue to build this network and build data and make it better. So a couple examples, I will go quickly because I want you to have time to talk to your panelists. But an example here of an accepted or a rejected pair, for example, Quantum has the same work title between the Bisbetic release and the Martin Garrix release. But as you can see, the composers are the same on the top, so correct match, and they are not the same on the bottom, so this would be a rejected match. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're saying we're overlapping data and creating context. Another example these are real examples, but I've completely changed the names, and I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, so bear with me here. But a thing that we've seen, for example, is across different publishers and different societies, the same writer is present, but with a slightly different spelled name or a different IPI number. So Frodo Baggins versus Mr. Frodo, different IPI numbers. We happen to have societies that were able to tell us that this is the same Mr. Frodo and that he has the same IPI base number, but that IPI base number is not available to everyone, nor is it available to us readily. So if you're looking at just writer names or just IPIs, you kind of end up with discrepancies here. And so although this passed validation, because enough of the writers did match across, it flags up to people in the system, hey, you have slightly different information from one another. Can we all agree on what we think the best approach is, or that these are all the same people? Another quick example here, where the publisher in this case effectively grabbed the name Mary Brandybuck. Obviously, it was a different real name, Brandybuck, from the artist name, and kind of said, oh, here's a matching writer, and inserted that person into the duo that was co-writing. But actually, that was not the right Mary Brandybuck, whereas the previous example, the different name and different IPI number was the same person. In this case, not the same person. So we're also able to flag not only validating things, but we're able to flag like, hey, you have the wrong information. This could be improved. In this case, you also have missing information, missing ISWCs, missing ISRCs that you could be enriching. So it starts to kind of, the more players at the party, the more context you have, the more parts of the elephant you can see, and then you can improve your data sets. Final example here, the Notorious B.I.G. has a track. If you look at the left-hand bottom, you have a screenshot here of Deezer with the writer names, multiple writers on this track, matching to a publisher ISWC ending in 7426. Similar, if not all the same writers. So this work to recording pair looks good. The CMO has a different ISWC associated with that ISRC, not necessarily a bad thing because it could be just a duplicate ISWC that was created. But in this case, it actually only has one writer. So-and-so Ingram, effectively, I would assume this means it's the original work that got sampled in the Notorious B.I.G. track. So in this case, this would create a discrepancy if a CMO is claiming 100% of the work and not claiming for this ISRC, where they should be claiming something more like maybe 5% or something. So I will run through this quickly, but I needed to use my classical music degree for something in my life, and this is my time to shine. So there are arrangements that can cause problems, and classical music, traditional music, public domain music that can cause matching problems. And I think it's a good example just of how easy it is to make a mismatch in a system once and how hard it might be to unravel that choice. So you have kind of quickly going here on the left-hand side, the very original text of this Johann Sebastian Bach violin track, which has then been arranged or at least digitized by a publisher. That new digital version is sheet music you have to buy, you have to rent in order to perform. But the sound coming out of my violin is going to be very much the same because this is an urtext version of the track. So not really quite an arrangement, but you're starting to enter the arrangement territory. Then you have a lot of kind of fun things that happen in classical music where it's really up to the performer how they want to interpret something like figured bass, how they want to stylize or ornament something that they're playing, how they want to do articulations, etc. And if you're performing it live and it's intangible, you know, it's kind of like jazz or just doing a jazz solo, it's not really quite an arrangement. But if you were to write out all of those things that you just played and, you know, print it out as sheet music and then sell that, then that kind of becomes a derivative work or an arrangement. You also can take something like Happy Birthday and write it all out for the orchestra. You can put a snare part, etc. That becomes a different derivative work and an arrangement that does have, it's not just public domain. And then finally, you can kind of do the opposite. You can take a symphony and you can condense it down into something like a piano part. In this case, interestingly, Franz Liszt is the arranger, so maybe this arrangement is also public domain, but at least the digital version is probably not, right? So kind of extrapolating that to data, you can see that it can be very easy to say, oh, Johann Sebastian Bach, that matches, aria, cool, this work to recording looks good. But actually there's an arranger here, Shimizu, who is not present on the recording composers. So it becomes hard from data alone to know whether or not this is the correct arrangement to be claiming or not. Another quick example here, this is like your nightmare scenario, which is two different arrangements are being described here, one in the recording, one in the composition by the publisher. Both are versions of Carol of the Bells. Who is supposed to claim what? And the reason that the system matched this is it's a public domain work, a DP work, and that part agreed. So the word traditional or Johann Sebastian Bach or whatever it is match. The arranger now doesn't match, and how do you want to handle that? So Verifi, of course, has our own rules and things that we apply. But I think these are good examples of just how easy it is to kind of end up with a polluted or difficult database to now have to pick apart and say what is really going on and why is scoring and algorithms important to help us with that task. So finally, just a couple kind of food for thought type of things of where we think things that are talked about, I'm sure will be talked about at Music Biz a lot if you go to Nashville, that we think collaborative data management and working together to solve the problem can help us faster. And those areas are, first of all, user-generated content. You can see here that video streaming is threatening to overtake audio streaming, short-form content, UGC, gaming, streaming of gaming, et cetera, where music is kind of being used. Creates a lot of challenges, not only in making sure you have the right licenses, and that's been in the news a lot, making sure that you have fair licenses as well, making sure you can identify that content. It's very hard to sometimes identify UGC content, especially if it's being kind of mashed up or manipulated in some way as part of the video. You also have AI-assisted music that is projected to keep growing, and making music is a human right. I don't think that we should be preventing people from using tools that can help them make music using AI assistance, but it does become a problem if you have music that's being training the AI to create like this sounds. That haven't been properly licensed, that the original creators aren't properly compensated, et cetera. And how do you make sure you have licenses and can compensate those people if you don't even know who wrote the master recording at the beginning? So again, that's going to be, I think, an area where working together to work smarter, not harder, is going to help us combat maybe some of the legal troubles that could come from this. And finally, just the sheer volume continues to grow, and being able to detect things like sped up audio, et cetera. It's getting better with MRTs, but is, in my experience, by no means perfect, especially when you are kind of manipulating the audio to such an extent that it is really just a completely different thing. And again, working together to kind of make sure we have the right amount of data possible, that things are being grouped, that ISRCs can be grouped, that works can be grouped to those ISRCs. Because at the end of the day, if a song's making money and somebody put it up there and is a derivative, I would be happy to get paid for it rather than have it being taken down. So again, it's all about making sure that we just have the data in place to do that. So all in all, my conclusion from the projects that we've run and from the stuff that we've been doing with our clients, we really feel, or at least I really feel, that these problems can be addressed smartly together. We're all looking at the same recording. We're looking at it from different angles. We're touching the elephant from different places. It sounded wrong. We might as well work together to try to, make something bigger than ourselves, which is hopefully a view that my colleagues share. So I'd like to welcome to the digital stage, Jordy, Max, Richard, and Alex, who are all members of the VRDA, and who we will have a short panel discussion with. So I will stop sharing and hope that my colleagues can find their unmute my video. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Chloe. Hi, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Shall I go ahead and introduce myself then?
Yeah. So, maybe each of you could tell us a little bit, hi, who are you? And maybe give us like a brief, maybe 1 to 2 sentence, high level pitch of why you think collaborative data is the future.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Awad, Licensing and Partnerships Manager for Fuga in London. And we've been sort of very happy with our partnership with the VRDA because I believe and we believe that most problems when it comes to metadata in the music industry can be solved to a very adequate level if we were to just be sharing our data a bit more sort of openly than we currently are. So yeah, really pleased with how things are going so far.
Thanks, Alex. Richard, want to go next?
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Richard. I'm the Global Director for Data and Business Intelligence at Warner Chappell Music. And yeah, kind of echoing the same, it's at this point, everyone's seen the good, bad, and the ugly. There's way more ugly than anyone really wants out there. And the only real meaningful move forward for all songwriters, current and up and coming, is just being honest, sharing our data more, and just trying to better ourselves and the future writers.
Well said. Max, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Max Adams, BI manager at Warner Chappell Music, based in London. And yeah, the VRDA has been great. We obviously get data from lots of different sources with varying levels of quality. So we're able to better understand now like what we do have and what's good and what's bad. So yeah, it's been good.
Jordy.
Hi, I'm Jordi Puy. I'm CEO of Unison Rights. We are a rights management entity, a type of CMO. And while we actually have been working with Verifi since 2017, and we joined the VRDA project as it was launched, because we believed and we know, and I think we've proven now that sharing metadata between the different players in the industry would help us to better collect and distribute the royalties that generate the usages of music, and therefore we could improve the distribution of royalties to right holders, to composers, and to their publishing companies. And I think that with the work that you've described, Chloe, of the project, of all the different parties, sharing metadata, improving the metadata in each side of the sector, you've delivered, and we together we've delivered sort of great positive results that are good for the industry and are good for every individual company to be able to make more money for the company and for the right holders, which is the most important part of it.
Amazing, thank you. And it's definitely a we, yeah. I mean, the network, we're here to talk about the network effect, I guess. And you know, us just having a system or mechanism that allows data to be analyzed is not enough. You need to have people actually actively working in the ecosystem. And as Alex said, and as all of you said, kind of opening up that transparency and allowing us to kind of make those connections and reach across. So big thank you to all of you for the work that you've done. So, Alex, I'm going to come back to you actually, because we recently had a roundtable in London last week that we hosted, and we had a lot of different people, a lot of different stakeholders come from all over the music industry to kind of chat about this. And for those that were not there, I think some of you actually on the call were also there, so thank you for coming. I was wondering if you could kind of give us your insights to what you took away from that, especially as sitting on that distribution side and on that recorded music side with a bunch of colleagues from the publishing side. Kind of what did you take away, or how do you think that some of the things that we discussed might be impacting labels and distributors in the future?
Yeah, so it was a really great couple of days that we spent with you lot on the call, and also everyone else who joined us. And I think what I keep coming back to in terms of what I learned the most from those days is that when you're dealing with a really, really complex problem, it's often a bit of a shooting for the stars to aim for perfect. And sometimes perfect is simply unattainable, and it can be a lot better to just go for very good, or like you were calling it earlier, Chloe, the best known truth. So I think when it comes to reframing our approach to what we would like to achieve when it comes to all these metadata problems, going for that best known truth is a really important sort of paradigm to have, I think. And perfection is something we should always continue to strive for, but let's be honest, you know, steps along the way before we get there, of course. And when we're getting to that best known truth, I really don't think there's a better way to do it than first-party data sharing, because there's no point in comparing sources of data that are far off from the truth. It's much better to go from all the sources that are as close as possible to being complete truths, laying them on top of each other, as you guys are doing, and then finding out basically from that which parts of our databases are pretty much consistent across the board. So we're happy and we're confident that these are correct in the first place. And then which ones are we finding a lot of discrepancies around? So I think what it was really valuable in doing is also informing ourselves about which parts of our databases are we perfectly confident in or very strongly confident in, and which ones are problematic parts that we should probably be dealing with a bit more caution around. So that was, I think, really, really beneficial. And to be frank, I mean, it's probably more beneficial in an immediate sense from the publisher's perspective, because obviously a lot of these issues have a lot more consequences when it comes to royalties being paid out on the publisher side. And when it came to that sort of, and me being around those discussions, it was more and more apparent the ways in which the distributors and the labels, as the very often the sort of first entity to be in contact with a new work, a new song, a new recording, because often, it's coming through a distributor and being sent to the DSPs before it's being registered on the publishing side, whether it's with the publishers or with the CMOs. And so given our position in that sort of timeline of when a song gets released, I think it shows just how important it can be to get accurate data inputted at the beginning. And it'd be amazing if we could get it all right in the beginning, but of course that's not going to be the case. So after that, there's all the good work that you guys are doing to layer it on top of each other and find the best known truth afterwards. But I think a lot of labels and distributors might feel like that's potentially an extra lift to try and take on a bit of that responsibility and put that effort in. But realistically, it's becoming a lift that is more and more valuable for the distributors and the labels as well. One of the situations that we've found sort of popping up recently is particular to Brazil, and it's DSPs in Brazil facing reasonable amounts of legal action because they had incorrect songwriter information being posted. And so those issues sort of spread down across the chain, of course, because everyone's implicated in those. And so it's one of these things where we're starting to become more implicated in the songwriter data being accurate, because we can get involved in issues that arise from it as well. So that's one way in which we've found that it's been very helpful to have the VRDA sort of comparing our data sets to others. Another one is pretty obvious. It's the syncs. I mean, we've lost a number of syncs in the past just because we didn't know where the publishing side of our recording sat, and there was someone requesting it and we simply couldn't find it in time. And so that's a shame. I'm sure anyone who's worked in sync has faced that issue before, and it's one thing that we can start to eliminate more and more. And the last one from my perspective in particular, coming from a licensing background, is that more and more of the digital platforms that I'm having conversations with, of course, would love to be able to license catalog completely. So one-stop shop, you get the recorded rights and you get the publishing rights. And that's very hard to do. There's not many entities that do control all of those rights. But funnily enough, even for an entity like Downtown Music, where we do control a significant amount of publishing as well as recordings, it can still be a challenge to know which ones those are and be confident in the data that we have around those and know that we can actually issue a one-stop shop license for those songs. And so that's one thing in which it's going to be enormously valuable for us moving forward to have that clearer picture across the rights landscape.
Amazing. Thank you, Alex. That was really in-depth and insightful. So amazing. I have lots of follow-ups, but I'm gonna let our other guys chat for a little bit. So Jordi, just hopping over to you on the RMU side of things. I think one of the topics that also came up that Alex briefly touched on at the roundtable was around the registration and point of registration at the work level, and that there needed to be sort of, one of the takeaways that I had was there needs to be more education or better education so that that registration is also correct at the time that it's registered, because you can have people kind of coming in from different CMOs, different publishers, different territories, creating a lot of kind of noise, and that becomes, delays in figuring out what the truth is. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, experience from the Collection Society side, and also maybe give a little bit of insight to those who are artists and songwriters watching this webinar or joining us today that maybe are kind of touching this for the first time. What do they need to know?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if answering to this question towards the artists, independent artists, and students, well, I would say that you need to register your creations with a collection agency for your work, and also for the masters and as a performer. That you need to do that if you want to ever see any income from the use of your creations. And then from a practical perspective, when I asked the operations team at Unison, what are the most common mistakes when registering works by independent artists or creators, composers, we have three main sort of like recurrent mistakes that happen, and it's errors on the percentage of ownership. So you have many songs that have different songwriters, co-composers, and nowadays in many styles of music, you can have up to 10 co-composers or more of a song. And whoever registers in their collection society and assigns certain percentages, if they don't match, if they don't add up, this creates conflicts. So that's one big sort of source of mistakes and problems. Then the misspelling and the other two are very much the ones that you pointed out in your explanation, Chloe. Misspelling their names or using nicknames, and then missing IPIs or wrong IPIs. And for the students and independent artists, the IPI is like your ID as a musician. You need to get an IPI that identifies you as a creator through all the different platforms, and that's what generates the most problems from the perspective of registration by artists. Those are the three blocks. And then by sharing metadata and using solutions that you are creating at Verifi for VRDA, it allows us to sort of clean that and through comparing, figure out which is the closest to the truth in terms of the percentages of ownership, the real name. It's Frodo Baggins, or it's is him or not. So this type of thing is what we try to solve to ultimately be able to collect properly, so the DSPs or any user knows who they have to pay, and then be able to distribute this money to the right holders, to the composers and their publishing companies.
Amazing, thank you. I guess, yeah, following up on just the importance of the sheer volume and the sheer number of potential different opinions that can happen on the publishing side, because unlike a recording where you have kind of one or two artists that have one recording put out by one label, one distributor, etc., on the publishing side, you have multiple co-writers that might be signed to different publishers, have different publishing representation in different territories, different societies, etc. So there's a lot of kind of versions of the truth that could be out there. So kind of putting it on you, Richard, from your seat at Chapel, how important is it that all of those other people are at the table, or can good data analysis be done, or a network effect be kind of created with even just some of those publishers and some of those co-writers to start with? What's your kind of view there?
Yeah, what's become very evident very, very quickly is the more people are transparent with each other, especially our side as rights holders, the more we benefit from it. So many people get this information from DSPs, just on usage, or from labels in their own way. Every country will be slightly different. The way every company interprets data can be slightly different. Even if you have really good data, parts of it can fall off. So with that being the case, without a single area to tap into, which currently really doesn't exist, and everything's been dancing around this, to be quite honest, those problems just exacerbate. Worst case is that incorrect matches are made, wrong people are getting paid, people who should be getting their money, especially people early in their career, are not getting what they should. That toxicity goes back into the circle, and that's the ecosystem we're in right now. So very much anyone, regardless of the size of the company, coming together is a very brave and big step forward, because it's really saying, look, we may not have everything perfect, and being brave enough to say that. But that's the only way really we can kind of move forward en masse. But it takes the coming together of that to get there. And I can speak from the Chapel side of it, of what we've done with our friends here so far as like a trial was incredible from the outcome from it. Knowing that we're not just putting out great stuff, so we know that at the point there's a release for a lot of our writers, they're going to get paid what they should get paid at the earliest possible point, which is our job to do. The fact that we're also cleaning up a bunch of stuff in thousands of different, or for us, like income source areas for different CMOs, different DSPs, to make sure that it doesn't then flood back through, means that their income's protected, their career is protected. And that's what we should be doing en masse. But it really takes the coming together to do it. Doing it individually has not worked. It continues not to work.
Hear, hear. Thank you for that. So yeah, Max, maybe just to kind of follow on from Richard saying, from your perspective, because you and I have been looking and analyzing some of the data that came out of that trial. And a huge part of what was really important that we had is a way to score the data that's coming through and analyze the good and the bad matches. How has that kind of changed or added to the way that you're thinking about this type of data collaboration and the way that maybe you're going to use that data internally?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. Sorry, like how the data's been scored, because we don't really know how good the data that we receive in is unless you sort of manually go through it or someone comes back to you and says this looks incorrect. So we're obviously dealing with a lot of data all the time. So yeah, it's been really interesting to see, okay, like these sources of data are good, these sources of data are bad, and then also pinpoint specifics too. So it's been really, really good to have now just like a subset of data which we're confident in, and we've actually been able to build internal products off the back of it, which actually can be used in a lot of ways. So it could potentially help us tap into piles of unclaimed royalties. We can manage conflicts at DSPs with other publishers. Even we could use it to like creatively service our songwriters or approach deals differently. So yeah, it's been very interesting to see how all this data's been scored.
Amazing. Thanks, Max. We do have some questions I see kind of both across the chat and the Q&A. So apologies, guys, because I'm probably not going to read this in the order that you guys sent them in. But there's one from Michelle, who is an independent. I'll try to summarize what was written here, but an independent creator here who has data across many decades and therefore across different CMOs over the years have put it in. You're welcome. Possibly different publishing, et cetera. And there's incorrect information across different platforms. And the question is, how can an independent artist or writer help create or help fix some of this data, especially if possibly working directly with their CMO isn't really moving the needle? Is there hope for the future, or are there things that kind of are just kind of blocked by, because some of this data sharing that we're talking about, Michelle, is dependent on a lot of people kind of opting in and buying into this concept as well. So do you think that there's is there something someone can do today that's an independent artist? And do you think that there's a movement towards being able to facilitate this on that more kind of individual level as well? Kind of open question to the group.
I mean, I might start with it, Michelle. I mean, I think, and I don't know if my colleagues will think differently, but I believe it's very, very difficult to solve this problem with the involvement of your CMO. As the rights management organizations and CMO, we have access to all the international databases for the IPIs, for the ISWCs, whether it's generation or checking it out. So it would be very, very difficult to make sure that your songs are correctly registered on those international databases unless it's done by the CMO. And I don't know which one you are with, but I think that the best shot that you have is to convince them to look into it and try to solve this problem. Because also, if you are independent, you don't have a publisher. You are your own publisher. So unless you do yourself the work of going there and trying to change those data sets, it's going to be very, very difficult.
Cool, thank you.
I don't know if you would agree with me, the colleagues from the publishing company side.
Yeah, I'd say so. So if you're not published and you're doing everything yourself, when it comes to something like cleaning up this kind of mess, it is a pain in everything, to say the very least, just because you have the legacy issues that will persist throughout different PROs. So if CZAC, in this case, if we're with CZAC for the US, it is their responsibility to pick this up and run with it. If you are representing yourself on the publishing side, you represent your own publishing rights, you can go indirect as well and play it that way. I would argue that might be better. There are also other considerations if you're independent of CZAC can help where CZAC are locked in with other CMOs. There are some CMOs that are not part of the same network. They share very differently. And you would need then to make sure everything's being collected correctly by plugging in direct that way. So it takes a bit more work doing it independent. And that's only because of the way the ecosystems kind of work, because there's no source of truth at the moment pointing to everything. And the lack of that is key here, because it should be easy ultimately. And the fact that it's not it's going to remain a problem until this is available. So until then, if you haven't got a publishing partner to rely on, it would be having CZAC taking on the job they're meant to do for your rights and your data on behalf of those rights they represent. And then for the mechanical side, for the MLC or anything similar to that, going direct and making sure it's correct there. Because there are a couple of ecosystems and it's just making sure it's there. If you have all the metadata your side, you have all the ISRCs or the ISWCs, you can update or even re-register everything and have a fresh route to go back out, and they'll update all the works. But at that point, if it's on your side, CZAC have to play ball with you ultimately, and it's their job to. And if not, it could be maybe seeking an interim partner to help with this on the side, just to help clean it up. Again, because there's no source of truth in the middle, it's finding the best route for your catalog, for the problems that you have within your catalog.
Definitely. I know we want to try to stop on the hour if we can, so we have one more question that came in, which I'm going to slightly alter, Keith, if you're okay with that, which is to ask, how important is the ISWC in metadata in general? The question specifically is around some sync companies maybe are less likely to license a song if it does not have an ISWC, and is that true? But I would also kind of maybe broaden the question a little bit and say, what is the most important piece of linking that you need to have? Is the ISWC to ISRC the most important link? Or are there other ways that you can link a work to recording that are just as valid or maybe more important, given that not every work will get an ISWC in its lifetime? Maybe question Max or Richard.
It doesn't have to be ISWC. That's perfect. They do take time sometimes to get, so it's not necessarily ideal right now, not necessarily ideal. However, any contextual information you provide will move the needle miles. From a publishing world, from a songwriting world, if someone covers one of your songs and all you get is the artist and the title and nothing else, you're already on the back foot. And the chances of the money going through to the owned are instantly at the lowest they could get, purely based on that. Any contextual information, that could be partial writer, it could be an ISNI, an IPI, it could be anything, already ups the chances of that being picked up somewhere else, just because the ecosystem hits so many other areas. More often than not, especially young artists, metadata is not important to them. Totally get it. It's an educational piece, and it's not the fun part of the creative part in that respect, but it's the bit that guarantees your income and guarantees your future. So it's the more you put in, the more chance you have of it coming back. ISWC would be perfect. CZAC, we own that. I'm trying to do a lot to speed it up with support from everyone to make it easier. Until that's there, it's any tiny piece of context around it goes a huge, huge mile.
I mean, I agree totally with you on the need of the ISWC quick. We now are able to generate ISWCs weekly for all the repertoire that is registered with us, and for us in our part of the business, it is key to match the ISWC and the ISRCs, because despite we work with the musical work, so it's the ISWC, it's our code, to say it in that way. We need the ISRCs to collect properly from many digital platforms that are not as ISWC driven. And some of the platforms, if you don't have the ISRCs linked to the ISWCs, you will miss a lot of money. So we do a lot of matching, and that's one of the reasons why we also fully support and are engaged on data sharing, because ISRCs will benefit the writers, and ISWCs, as it was being pointed out before, it will benefit the record labels to be able to do better syncs or more syncs, or there's always going to be benefits on metadata enrichment.
Definitely. And I think I would just add as we close, and namaste from our wonderful session, that yeah, I think not only is the codes important. Yes, all the identifiers, I absolutely agree with you, Juanita, but also contextual information that help you explain that identifier, because a code alone is obviously not really enough if you don't really know what that title or that artist or that writer name is supposed to be within that code. Because if someone makes a code mistake, then you're kind of blind to see the rest of that information. So I would say that if at all possible, especially if you are a manager, an artist, an A&R person out there that's gathering up stuff for a release, having as much contextual information kept together as possible is super helpful for those of us that are trying to figure out the picture on the other side. So with that being said, a huge round of applause and a huge thank you to Rich, Alex, Max, and Jordi, and also to Henrik and the Music Business Association for having us. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for your good questions. If we didn't answer your question, you have anything else, please do feel free to reach out to me, Chloe at verifi.media, and I'll do my best to answer your question. And yeah, we hope to see you at Music Biz and at another webinar in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much for being here with us today. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your questions. And to Richard, Max, Jordi, Chloe, Alex, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate you being here today. For the folks we'll see at Music Biz in May, we'll be very excited to welcome you to Music City in a couple of weeks here. Y'all take care. Have a great rest of your day and week.